All right. Welcome to Bigger Truth Media. I am Scott McMahon. I have Dr. Andrew Huff today, and I am so excited about this. This is one that I've been wanting to do since I first started reading your tweets that really started back in like September. I went through all of your Twitter profile and read all of your tweets starting from September all the way through January. and I said, I gotta talk to this guy. So Dr. Huff wrote this book, and I have it, but I listen faster than I read. So I bought it on Audible, and I listened to the whole thing, and it is an amazing story. It's the truth about Wuhan, how I uncovered the biggest lie in history, and Dr. Huff has lived an extraordinary life. You're younger than I am, and you have been at the center of some major things. And as the audience is going to find out, you're even I'm bringing you in because you have to do with the story that I'm trying to tell here as well, as far as the infiltration of the Republican Party. And what this book is about is you worked for EcoHealth Alliance under Peter Daszak. Yeah, and so you witnessed firsthand how they were writing grants and receiving government funds for gain of function research that was going to the Wuhan lab. And
that's correct.
Yeah, and then you and you were whistleblower on that once COVID came out, and then the government started going after you. We're going to talk about that a little bit more in a minute, but there's another crazy thing that before you worked for EcoHealth, you were involved in developing the database of food distribution centers across the country. Is that right?
Well, that's correct. So as part of my PhD dissertation or thesis research, I worked at a Department of Homeland Security Center of Excellence, and I became an expert in protecting the food supply. But how do you become an expert in protecting the food supply from all threats that you can think of, hurricanes, terrorism, warfare? Well, you have to figure out how to break it or attack it. So I became an expert in breaking that system and actually poisoning people through it, using the system as a weapon. And as part of that, we worked with all the different states that would work with us. I think a total of about 42 states within the United States agreed to participate. So we collected all the critical infrastructure data for the food and agriculture sector and their second and third order dependencies, whether that's transportation, food, and water. So this is a big complex data set. It was informed by subject matter experts in state government and industry. So this is one of the best data sets in the world in terms of being able to model, forecast, and predict and measure threats, vulnerabilities, and consequences to the food system. And in my crazy story, this data set is stolen from my house during a whistleblower reprisal event from coming out as a whistleblower related to the Wuhan laboratory and the gain of function work that we're doing there. And it's sort of like all like a bad dream or a nightmare, and I'm glad that I got through it. But the strangest thing is that data set went missing from my house, and so who did it? There was a gentleman by the name of Mike Bennett who came into my life, and I believe Mike Bennett is connected to Tom Renz out of Ohio, Mike Flynn out of Ohio, but he was also a government employee, a Defense Intelligence Agency officer, a naval intelligence. He was actually the instructor at the Naval Intelligence School. And he worked in the Office of Director of National Intelligence and also as the DHS. I forget what his title was. I think he was a Homeland Weapons Mass Destruction Coordinator or official for critical infrastructure at DHS. So this is a guy who's well seasoned in the national security intelligence community. And I was talking to this guy on the phone, and I thought this guy was a spook from day one. He knew everything about EcoHealth Alliance. He knew everything, all the ins and outs of the gain of function research. He knew such a level of detail about my former colleagues and the inner workings of the government. I figured this guy was, trying to figure out what I knew and what I was going to do. Well, I told him that I likely had the missing genetic sequence data from the Wuhan Institute of Virology on a hard drive at my house in an attempt to set him up to trigger an investigation. And what he didn't know, or what they didn't know, is that it actually contained all of the critical infrastructure data, which ended up being classified, or certain aspects at the level of secret and top secret. And the reason why I was able to even retain a copy of these data is that I did this as this research as a PhD student, and then it was classification through compilation was one of the titles that they use for it, or the descriptions. So this later becomes classified, but because I did this outside of the government on my own, I was able to keep my own copy of it. And I quickly report this theft of the data going missing from my house to the FBI, the Michigan State Police, the Marquette County Sheriff's Department up here in the Upper Peninsula, Michigan, and nobody investigates. I reported to the alphabet soup of agencies involved, the FDA, USDA. I sent letters off to executives in the states that were impacted that are conservatives. I might actually circle back. There are so many different maneuvers I can still play with this to this day because it's one of the most egregious breaches of national security to date. And the idea that the theft of these data have not been taken seriously is really quite serious. I mean, it could just be that, you know, some drug user broke into my house and stole this from my house. It could be, that could be a possibility. These could have been henchmen from either the Democratic or Republican Party. I mean, I think a lot of my whistleblowing early on was viewed as me being a partisan in nature, but actually none of my whistleblowing has anything to do with politics. And I tried to always make that distinction. I've worked in the government and served the government. I've had the government either as a customer, a client, worked in the government with a .gov address. And I don't think anyone has ever viewed me as a partisan while working as a technocrat or bureaucrat or a scientist in the government. I've always been able to distinguish between the two. And yet I was framed as a right-wing radical. I mean, I am a constitutionalist Republican, and I do have certain strong views, but I do understand that there's a spectrum of people within the Republican Party, and I'm not out trying to, you know, overthrow the government or do anything radical. And I think it's a very bad idea. So anyways, I mean, this is sort of the politics in the situation, but it's very interesting to see how this story has evolved. Some people called me the Forrest Gump of modern history, as you alluded to earlier. I've been in a lot of interesting places at the right time, so to speak, and it's taken my life down this interesting path.
So you just shared a whole lot. So and the time frame now, so that you're talking about, just to understand the timing of all this. So you came out in 2021 about EcoHealth Alliance, is that right? Like towards
That's correct. Well, what had happened progressively, so in early 2019, or excuse me, in late 2019, I was a tech executive or biotech executive out in California, living in the Bay Area, in my little conservative enclave. I guess you'd call it Schwarzenegger Republicans, and in that area. So I caught wind of the disease spreading fairly early, and I panicked because I knew that this was likely the next biggest pandemic. And we got out of our property as fast as we could and relocated to a remote area. And the place that we found a house with some acreage and, you know, good value per acre, and the newer house that we wanted and living off grid kind of setup was in the UP. And everyone thought I was nuts. All my friends and family thought I was nuts. And we were packed up and we were moved in here by March 30th of 2020. And this point, this is about when lockdowns are about to go into place. And I already have my full face respirators, a 2-year food supply, all this stuff. And all these other people are panicking and buying food buckets and all this stuff. And I'm like, hey, I'm living off grid already. I'm ready to go. I'm all stocked up on goods. We'll see how this goes. Then by that summer, actually, I realized that we were being lied to in a number of ways. So I'm an infectious disease epidemiologist by training and engineer. And I had worked on the National Pandemic Preparedness Plan for various government agencies that are involved with that. I had actually participated in a number of human health services, sector coordinating council, government coordinating council, which are these sort of internal bureaucrat, technocrat meetings at a high level with industry which really set administrative policy. I've also been a part on the food and ag and a few other of the sectors. So I've been sitting in these meetings for years, and I realized that the government's lying to us. And I'm starting to get a lot of pushback. You know, I'm fighting the mask policy. I start fighting the lockdowns. I start doing the digging on the vaccine manufacturing process, approval process, and I'm finding irregularities or things that are strange. And, you know, in the back of my mind, I know that my former employer had been doing this gain of function research in Wuhan, China. And I'd been doing analysis this whole time from December, trying to figure out what's going on, because that's what I do. I forensically investigate infectious disease outbreaks. And none of it's making sense. So at the time I was really active on social, on LinkedIn, and I'm just start, quietly telling everyone I think this is a lab leak, this is going on, and I start getting censored. By the time from 2020 through 2021, I mean, I've sort of had it at this point, and I used maybe a stupid method, but I figured it was safe to come forward as a whistleblower in September, October of 2021, based on polls that I had been watching of the public opinion of whether or not it was a lab leak. And I figured I was like, in a safe area when I was trying to get around the 60% of the people believe that was a lab leak. I'm like, I'm going to come forward with everything I know now. And man, did the government and the globalists and a weird mix of people, and the Democrats and different factions of the Republican Party all came at me at once. And I'll tell you what, it was an overwhelming experience. Different factions of political parties hacking your devices, wealthy people hacking your devices. I mean, it's weird because you try to figure out what the source of this is, and you can to some.
Andrew, we're having some connection issues.
But I mean, the gist of it is, did it glitch out?
It did glitch out. Yeah.
Am I back? Are we good?
You're back. I think we're good now. Yeah.
Okay. So what was the last thing you heard?
You were just beginning to talk about what the government was doing to you.
Sure.
Yeah.
So the government and high wealth individuals, different factions, the Republican Party, Democrats, all coming after me, hacking my devices. And this all escalates for a period of about a year and a half, 2 years. And it gets to the point where I actually catch the Michigan State Police and FBI trespassing on my property. The government tried to entrap me with drug dealing, illegal firearms, sex capades. I mean, like, I had Ukrainian prostitutes basically at my local bar up here in near Ishpeming. I mean, just very, very interesting things happening. And I collected, and the thing is, because I was trained as a criminal forensic investigator for epidemiology by the FBI, and I actually had courses on this when I was in the military, criminal investigations, I started collecting evidence, and I collected a ton of evidence back against all these people. And it gets to the point where I catch the FBI and the state police trespassing my property. Like I just said, they had like a Fednapping like hoax. So basically, the FBI showed up at my house dressed like Michigan State Police after I had caught these guys tailing me the week before in Chicago. Same guy showed up at my house the next week dressed as Michigan State police officers and their FBI agents. My neighbors were witness to this. A number of other people had been witness to this. So it's just all very crazy. I mean, just you can't make it stuff up. And now it's to the point where I hired private investigators, and I'm giving actually private criminal attorneys to go back after these guys, and that's all unfolding now. And I hold all the cards, and I'm gonna I'm gonna get even with these people. I mean, if they think they're gonna get away with this, they screwed to the wrong guy, because they pissed me off more than I've ever been pissed off in my life. And really, I was just out trying to protect people, public health, and fix this scientifically. And I received the feedback last week from somebody who was even too scared to give me their real name, who was a staffer for Congress, and then also a few other people who will give me their name, who work in Congress. And they told me that I'm one of the most feared people by Congress right now. They're terrified of me.
Wow.
And that's a great position to be in, because I've been pushing the U.S. government so hard that they've been putting out, over the past 3 years, that the different 3-letter agencies have responded to the material and information I put forward. The Department of Defense has had to respond to my allegations, because I've submitted affidavits under oath with penalty of perjury related to vaccine injuries, them fraudulently modifying data. I mean, I worked in a lot of different areas of the government. It's not me. Someone in the government actually accused me of having classified information leaked to me. It's not that anyone has leaked any information to me. It's that I'm a fairly smart guy, and I pay attention. I've always been good at what I do in the work, so I'm able to put the pieces together. And I have a good, solid scientific approach to analysis and asking the right questions, and that's how I get the answers. And that's how I've made a reputation for myself over the years. And that's how I've wound up in all these crazy places and advanced my career quickly. So anyways, I'm they pissed me off, and now I know where to go find data and find government reports and things, and I just turn their own open source information right back against them.
So I am, I think, you know, uh, 6 months ago, I was just a real estate agent. And, and I've been under attack just a little bit, nothing at all like what you've experienced. I mean, nowhere near it. But, just for, just for sharing evidence that I've been able just in the same way, like this hasn't necessarily happened to me. You have more personal experience with this. What is it that you think that you have that makes you so dangerous to the government?
I don't think it's necessarily what I have. I think it's what I represent. So I grew up to an alcoholic father in trailer court, and lived in the trailer court not because they were necessarily poor, but they made continuous. My parents made continually poor life choices, and I escaped that. Joined the military. Did very well in the military. Volunteered. I was the guy in the infantry that volunteered for all the missions. My first mission or deployment was a very high-speed Hollywood mission to Central America during narcotics interdiction. There was hostage rescue, chasing down members of Al Qaeda. I mean, stuff you sort of see in the movies. That was my first tour as a young private. I just won the deployment lottery. Second one was straight line infantry combat deployment to Iraq. Very typical. I was promoted to an officer. I was a Mustang. And actually, we can get around to this what I'm up to now, but the military signaled they want me to come back in at a very high rank. And I don't know if they're trying to control me. Bit of a tangent, but what I've heard from both Democrats and Republicans and people that I consider to be part of the global elite is that I was groomed to be a leader in national security. I was groomed to be a Anthony Fauci type. I mean, that's why I had so much time in Washington, D.C. as a PhD student. I performed well. I present well. I'm a tall, handsome guy. And I've heard people say that I got where I am because of my looks. Whatever. I mean, just putting out possibilities here. But the fact that I am so not corruptible. I mean, I've had people come at me with crazy sort of business offers to throw $300,000 at me basically to sign my life away, and people keep coming at me with different deals and. I've just been running counterintelligence on these people, and I keep blowing up the deals on purpose because I'm trying to figure out how all these people are related. And I think they find that frightening, right? So if you can't be corrupted and you have values and principles and you go toe to toe with these people, and I put people on notice, and when they come at me, my response, I treat these people like terrorists. When they come at me, there's no negotiation. The negotiation's silent. And what I do is I come back to them with more data evidence, and I play lawfare with these people, and I do it all by myself. I know how to leverage the agencies against each other. I know how to leverage the state versus the feds, the county versus this. I know how to get private companies, the globalists scared. I'll send the SEC after them. There's a lot of weird stuff you can do if you understand how the bureaucracy works. And I get people on the record. The last thing the government wants to do if they're doing bad things, and they're doing it with political allies, either Democrats or Republicans, the last thing they want is stuff on the record. And I'm sort of at the point now where I realize that I don't think the Senate's ever going to call me to testify. They haven't called any other firsthand witnesses related to the origin of the SARS-CoV-2. In fact, they're protecting Dr. Peter Daszak and Dr. Ralph Barrett from the University of North Carolina. And frankly, I don't care at this point, because I can leverage these people more powerful in the position that I am now than actually being a partner in the system. And I was actually sort of tweeting with Laura Loomer. She's asking, should I run against this rhino in my district? And I told her not to, because she's going to have far more impact on U.S. and international policy from her role as a social media journalist figure. And they actually, I think, tried to capture me the same way. I think it was probably a deal brokered by the quote unquote deep state / IC / Republicans, uniparties, that they wanted me to run for Congress against Bergman. And I think I could have smoked Jack Bergman in my district. And I would be doing it from a personal place as well, because I asked Jack Bergman for help when I was getting harassed by the FBI and all these other agencies. And guess who didn't come to help me? Jack Bergman. So, I mean, I have reason, I had a reason to do this, but when I stepped back and I looked at it, I'm like, what do I have to gain by this? So one, it's a real tough job being a congressman. You'd be a freshman. And then I'd be expected to fall in line, and I wouldn't be able to be a vocal and push the government from inside of Congress. I'd be tied into congressional procedure, right? And that's when I made the conscious decision, is I'm far more powerful outside of Congress. And I talked to my mentors and people that I've respected for career advice, and they said, maybe wait for a different office later in your life, but don't waste your time sitting in Congress.
Yeah. So with the time, speaking of time, with the time we've got left, I want to focus on we've kind of set the stage here. You have and that last comment, the most humble too. That's definitely been my experience. I didn't expect to be able to, I was a nobody when I was starting. I didn't expect to be able to talk to you. You've been totally generous with your time and your information and your experience. And I've really enjoyed getting to know you, and very grateful that you're here. So, you, and on the topic of running for office, you were contacted by Tom Renz. So Tom Renz was your attorney.
Well, sort of.
Attorney?
Yeah, so it's weird. So I volunteered for Renz's law firm as an expert on a number of vaccine injury, epidemiology, national security expert kind of basis. And he came at me with the promises that he would file cases on my behalf. But this is back in early 2022. So like January, February 2022. After about 3 or 4 months of dealing with Tom Renz, I automatically suspected that he was a bad guy. And he was probably involved in some of the weirdness or craziness going on in my life. And so when back to the part where I said multiple groups attacking me, I know for a fact that I had, the local corrupt government working with the state and the feds, and the locals who aligned with those people, right? Because all politics are local. And then we also had the outsiders, the influence from probably RFK Jr.'s camp and Mike Flynn's camp, where they overlap, aka Tom Renz. And so when all this craziness starts happening in my life in November of 2021, so my training kicks in, and I launch a counterintelligence operation against everyone in my life, including my family, best friends. And the way that you do this is you seed misinformation into each one of the compartments or channels, and you wait for that misinformation to resurface. And in Tom Renz's channel, I had information go 2 directions through Tom on 2 different occasions, for a total of 4 or 5 different times where misinformation from other people in my network came back through Tom Renz. And that's how you identify leaks in the US government in a classified setting. So at that point, when I noticed, this is very upsetting or frustrating, I sat on it for a long time, and then I basically called Tom.
Attorney. So you're suddenly realizing that your attorney is, because when you wrote the book, he was still your attorney.
Well, I was running the counterintelligence operation already on him by that point, but when I wrote the book, but I was sort of in a position where I couldn't show my cards yet, because I needed to find out who else was involved. And that's a real difficult position in, but the old saying, you need to wait until you see the white of their eyes before you shoot. That's what running a counterintelligence operation is like. It's like, how much pain can you tolerate, and how long can you play this before you show your hand? The timing on all this in the weakened position is incredibly important. Timing's everything. And finally, I call him out. Like, Tom was not demonstrating any utility to me anymore, or my counterintelligence operation, because I started calling him out on weird stuff he had been doing. And finally, I call him out again with some real hard evidence, basically, about information that had been circled back through him, showing that he was a bad guy. And that's when he suggests I run for office. He introduces me to Kristina Karamo, and also Robert Owens from Ohio, who have been very active with the former MIGOP leadership.
Yep.
And they show up at my house about a week later. After when they're introduced, it's all very friendly. And Tom frames this as, we're sending some people to your house to help you, and they're going to help you get elected. And by this point, I've lost hundreds of thousands of dollars, had all sorts of terrible crap done to me. And so really, actually, I'm like, well, maybe Tom's actually trying to help me here. Well, no, not really. Kristina and Owen show up, and at the conclusion of their visit, they asked me for 20 grand and basically what I would consider to be a pay-to-play election scam. And I'm not new to politics, and I was sort of shocked, and I played it cool. And then I basically lit them up on a group text message thread the next day or the day after, and my wife was present. And I asked her, I'm like, was that what did that just happen? I mean, am I seeing this differently? Do you see this the same way? And she agreed. And she's a quite reasonable person, and she's not overly political. So then I lit them up on this group message thread, and they came back to me and they said, well, we thought you were a spy. And I get that a lot. And they're like, you act like a spy. We thought you were a spy. And so, we're going to help you for free and help you primary Bergman. And basically what evolves is that, shortly after that meeting, Robert Owens is convicted of felony or numerous felonies. I think it's in Delaware or Ohio. And then he shows up the next week, and I don't know any of this. He shows up at the house the week after to once again help me. And he shows up with a cache of firearms, and we're shooting on my property. So here he is, right. After the fact, I learned that he's transporting.
He's on probation at this point. So he first came to your house because we went over the time frame when I wrote a story about Robert Owens, and it was the beginning of September of 23. So just last year when he came, he was convicted. I think it was September 11th of 23 is when he was convicted of $120,000 in embezzlement, or over $100,000. I don't know the exact amount in embezzlement. And at the same time, his ex-wife filed an affidavit saying that he was about $110,000 behind in child support, and also that he had hired a dozen prostitutes in the previous year. And so now he's showing up and having an overnight with Kristina, and there are some others there too, right? So I'm not insinuating that he and Kristina were like a couple, but Kristina Karamo and Robert Owens show up at your house right in the middle of this, like right in the middle. And this is also right before the Mackinac conference. So they were trying to raise money so that they could say that the Mackinac conference was profitable. And that's part of the reason why they came to you. And then it was, I think the beginning of October is when Robert Owens came back. So this was after his conviction. He's on probation, and he's not supposed to even leave Ohio. And here he is in Michigan at like extreme northwestern UP with a case full of guns and shooting guns on your property at your private shooting range. And yeah, here we go. So crazy stuff.
You nailed it. And then so I did after this visit, I'm already determined that I'm not running for office, but I'm once again running my counterintelligence investigation, trying to figure out what's going on.
Right.
And I start digging it. That's when I start to do my dig on Owens after their second visit. And that's when I find the conviction. I'm like, holy crap, and then I'm like, what the hell's the deal with Kristina, and I'm just trying to put this all together. And I presented at the leadership conference at Mackinac Island. And so I'm just trying to figure it out at this point. But, where there's smoke, there's fire. And to this day, I still don't understand what the bigger play is. If you look back to whether you play the game, follow the money, which I did, it goes back to people like the America Project, Patrick Byrne, who's a close ally of Trump. You've got ostensibly General Mike Flynn, who, perceives to be saying all the right things. But then if you look at his background and my personal dealings with other people in his network and his inner circle, I asked him a pointed question, and he didn't respond. And I know, though he was reading my tweets at least for a while, I asked him, like, have you or your associates ever been near or at my property to collect for intelligence collection activities? And he wouldn't respond. And neither would Tom Renz. Isn't that a really simple thing to answer no to?
Right.
Yeah, and I was on to it. I'm like, okay, so what's going on here? It turns out Robert Owens, his dad was a Defense Intelligence Agency officer, very, in DIA and the CIA are sort of hand in hand, and he was responsible for operations in Berlin during the height of the Cold War. So, I mean, these are seasoned intel people, and if you have a son like that, you probably pass that information or knowledge along to your son. It sounded like he did, the way that Robert was, talking about his father. And really, here's the thing. I feel like Robert has his heart in the right place, potentially. I think Kristina have their heart in the right place. I think there's some weird infighting happening on the side of the Republican Party, and it's hard to tell what's going on. It seems like my assessment of what Mike Flynn has been up to is that he's been working really hard to get certain candidates and push the party a certain direction. And that's at the consequence, though, of overtaking the government, overtaking the party, the Republican Party in some aspects, which will make it unelectable in general elections. I mean, that's the way I see it. So you can have people that are all for the Constitution, patriots, but if you start talking about overthrowing the government and creating chaos, it's dangerous. I think that kind of talk is very dangerous. I don't support it. And you have to realize that, my involvement in politics has mostly been at the national and international level. And I've dealt a lot with Congress. I've sat in the speaker's office, the whip's office. I've had talks with different leaders in both Republican and Democratic Party over the years as an outside expert. And you don't win majorities in Congress by alienating people in the middle. Sure. And if you look at most of the districts that are swing districts, you can't put someone like me into a swing district and have me be true to my values and beliefs and win, because I'll get clobbered. I mean, maybe I have a likability factor, but I try to be realistic here. If you put really hardline candidates from the Republican Party into swing districts, or basically Democratic districts that are purple districts, they're not going to win, unless they're really upset with the establishment. So, you have to be smart about how you do this at the state level and the national level. And, I understand the sense of frustration among the grassroots organizers, especially in my district, in District 1, the UP and Northern Lower of Michigan, how they're upset with the system. But you also have to understand how the system works and, what your role in state party politics is. And I think there's a lot of these lines are being confused or blurred by outside agitators.
Right. Yep. So, so do you think that Robert Owens is one of those agitators?
Well, I think he's a consultant. I think he needs the money. And I think, I did believe him to be a strong libertarian type person. I mean, he did mention to me that he worked on Ron Paul's campaign as a congressman. Mm-hmm. He was very proud of that. I think if consultants, though, they follow the money, and if he was hired by someone else and they're willing to pay him, then I'm sure you take the work on.
Right. So you mentioned Mike Bennett earlier, and how do you tie Mike Bennett to Robert Owens?
Well, I was still running my counterintelligence activities, and
just hang on. I'm sorry, Andrew. Just to review, because we've talked about a lot of things since then. So Mike Bennett is the individual that you believe stole your hard drives, stole the database from your computer in some way.
I believe he was part of the team that stole the information. So I think he was a person. I'd never met him in person. I only spoke to him on the phone. But shortly after that conversation, the database went missing from my house, the hard drive. So it was either someone eavesdropping on the conversation, but it's a strange coincidence that this guy that I've never met, who I think is an intelligence official, he's now been fired from the government, and he's an executive at Snapchat. If you go look on LinkedIn, you can look this guy up, who I think it is. And I have his IP addresses, all sorts of stuff. So I've got information on the guy, but nobody will investigate it, which is strange. And that tells you something right there. And so during the second visit, while Robert Owens and company are at my house, towards the end of the visit, I was waiting to ask this question, because I'm trying to figure out what the connection to Mike Bennett had been to any of these guys since day one. So I asked him, what did I ask him? I go, so what do you think about this guy, Mike Bennett, who that I met and who stole these hard drives? And then I said, then the next thing I said, I'm like, I've actually filed a DOD, Department of Defense, Criminal Investigation Division complaint against Mike Bennett. And so for people who don't understand what that is, it's like the FBI on steroids, because it's the FBI equivalent within the Department of Defense. But people who are veterans, military soldiers, and sailors have fewer rights than civilians. So they're they fall under UCMJ, and due process is different. And, terms for search are a little bit different, all these other things. And he knew what that meant. And he panicked. And all of a sudden, they were going to leave at 4 p.m, and they were packing up as fast as they could. He went out the door. He started making private phone calls away from everybody. So what I conclude from this, based on analyzing his behavior, is that Robert Owens, Tom Renz, and Mike Flynn are likely connected to Mike Bennett, this intelligence official. The reason why he was probably fired from the government was that I'm guessing that he did this under the nose of the Biden administration, which maybe would be a smart move, right? Like politically, but he got caught. And, because he is a deep state IC guy and they don't want this to be a huge scandal, and based on everything that happened at my house after the fact, they just want this guy to be quiet and go away. So he gets reassigned 3 or 4 times in the government, and then he's out. And maybe this is it. Maybe here's the thing. I'll admit, maybe my analysis of my profile of who Mike Bennett is completely wrong. I can tell you, I haven't heard anyone come from the government come back and tell me that I'm wrong. Feds, associates that I've worked with, and there's been no investigation. And with all the food facility fires that have happened, and what appear to be terrorist events from my analysis of the data, so I ran statistical tests to see if there are matches between all these destroyed food facilities and the data set. They are related, or they are associated or correlated, and that's just highly unlikely. So that somebody would have all this information unless it was stolen. It could have been stolen from myself or several other people. But so here you have a guy who had a top secret clearance with the U.S. government, contact the government and say, this went missing. I'm one of the foremost experts in the world on the subject, and there's no investigation. I mean, doesn't that seem a little strange? Like, don't you think you want to get to the bottom of where these data went and who stole these hard drives? Well, no, the FBI was working probably with this guy, or some associates of Renz or Flynn, some private contractors from Blackwater probably. And they came and, snuck into my house and stole this. But it was gone the next day. It was gone that quick.
So the physical hard drive was removed from your house?
Oh yeah. And I had hard drives and computers and all sorts of
stuff. You have
a
security system. How did they get in?
At the time, I didn't have a security system. I had none, or I had maybe an Arlo system, something cheap. Yeah. And then I upgraded actually to a closed system. And what they had done is they had broken into the house and tampered with one of the drives, I think. And then I put a different drive in. I replaced the drive that had failed, and these things supposedly never fail, but it got scrambled. And when the one that I replaced it with, it was clever. This is a clever move by the state police and the FBI. They put a different piece of hardware in when it got swapped to backdoor the camera system. But wow. This is the FBI that you're dealing with, and intelligence services. So if you don't think they can backdoor a closed loop system built in China,
right? Yeah. Wow. So and the hard drive that you're talking about, or the database that you're talking about, this is the database of the food security database that basically has a list of all of the food factories and distribution centers.
In enemy hands, it serves as an attack list. Basically, rank order attack list. This is what you hit and how bad it's going to be. And it tells you exactly where to hit. And
how many of those, if you did rank order, like you said, from 1 to 500 or 1,000, I don't know, how many were on the database? What was the correlation with that as far as
the probability better? It's 1 in a billion that the list would match the way that it did. So
so they started at the top of the list and they just worked the way down.
No. So you have a list. So the thing is, you have to make a comparison between all the food facilities in the nation. Okay, so different ways of counting that, but for argument's sake, we'll say there's roughly 2 million food facilities or processing facilities or farms that are of concern, or that would fit the definition according to the Department of Homeland Security. Okay, of those 2 million facilities, only about 400 make it on the list after they're analyzed and they're evaluated. So the calculation is 400 over 2 million, okay, over how many, this is the question, the unknown over 2 million, back against the 400 list. So when you do that calculation, the probability that you would have most of the attacks at these critical facilities showing up as the places that are attacked is highly improbable, because there's 2 million facilities. If it were the question is this random or not? So if the majority, 90% of the facilities attacked are also a part of the 400, it's a t-test score of like 1,000 something. And actually, when I ran the t-test, the student's t-test on it, I'd never seen a t-test score so high in my life based on real world data. I mean, you'll see that kind of thing playing, computer games with math and modeling and simulation, trying to learn statistics, like in a practice problem. But I had never seen that actually happen in a real world example, especially in national security.
Right. So the bottom line is that there's some really ugly things happening that we don't even want to think about. It's so hard to understand and comprehend. That's going on kind of behind the scenes. And in relation to the research that I've been doing, it really, why wouldn't they be attacking the Republican Party? I mean, that's the Republican Party is their primary political opposition, and especially the grassroots within the Republican Party. And if they can do anything to deceive, confuse, or even ultimately turn them against the party itself, then that would be a highly effective operation for them.
Well, absolutely. And if you look at what's happening with presidential politics, and so I became friends or allies in a way with Robert Kennedy Jr. He came to my aid when I was getting all this harassment from probably some of his people in his network. Once again, also separately government officials, both state and federal and local. Then also people on the Republican side, all these different people coming at me. And what I discovered through conversation is that there was actually an overlap between some of the people in Robert Kennedy's inner circle and some of the inner circle, including Mike Flynn, some of Mike Flynn's and some of Mike Flynn's inner circle and Mike Flynn himself. So what I'm saying here is that the RFK camp and the Flynn camp had been working together, strategizing and working on tactics after the 2020 election, where Trump loses. So they're two camps, they're people, these people, and I don't want to name who they are yet, had told me independently of each other that they're working with each other. So we have the Flynn camp working with the RFK Jr. camp. And I was trying to make sense of that, and it seemed like it was harmless to begin with. But what's happening is intelligence people and people who work in the government like myself is that we were smart enough to hedge all our bets. We hedge everything because we sometimes things don't go your way, and if you have someone who's as bright as Mike Flynn is and as experienced as he is in that world and the amount of resources that he has, he can probably play many different hands at once, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's smart. I think the problem is of how this played out through my discovery of what was going on and me, being justifiably paranoid and not trusting these people, was that they, I believe that the Flynn camp has been waging a psychological operation against Americans to some extent. I think that overlaps with some of the people in Kennedy's camp. And let's face it, the quote unquote rhinos and Democrats have been doing it too. But it's really, and at the end of the day, it ends up being a disservice because, I value, loyalty, duty, honor, integrity, personal courage, those characteristics. And I don't respond well personally to being lied to and deceived. And when I sense or know for a fact that deception came through people like Robert Owens, Tom Renz, and Mike Flynn, it makes me whole. It makes me entirely question their operation, because we're in a situation now which is very dangerous politically, where I feel like all sides are willing to do anything to win. And that is not a good place for our country to be in. I don't want Republicans to cheat and win. I don't want independents like Kennedy to cheat and win. I don't want the Democrats to cheat and win. I don't want us to stabbing each other to do that. We have to, how we win matters, and how we conduct ourselves in these difficult times matters. And it's what's really, for years, is the moral high ground that the United States military and also our country sort of created after World War II, which has just been steadily eroding over, 80 years. So, here we find ourselves, our country, our nation, in a weird place. And I don't think that Flynn or Kennedy's approach to this, the politics here, is totally with the intent of undermining all of society in some evil process. I think they're each each group or organization is in a struggle to win. And I think there's some reevaluation taking place as of recently in the last couple of days between the different political factions, between the Trump camp, the Flynn camp, Robert Kennedy's camp, and on the Democratic side, I think they're just lost. They don't know what to do. I mean, I think they're all terrified that Biden, is going to get smoked by somebody. But I think as time goes on, the chances of there being a three-way tie going to the House of Representatives looks very possible. I mean, Kennedy would only have to win a Democratic stronghold like California, to whatever extent that's possible, to make it so that the vote threshold was below 270, which would make an election in the House, which has happened before in U.S. history, and usually the third party candidate wins in that case, because it's a prisoner's dilemma. Neither Democrats or the Republicans are going to allow the other side to win, and Kennedy is already being positioned as the voice of reason in some areas, whether you agree with that or disagree. So this is the situation we're heading into, and I just wish that in retrospect that that maybe Flynn's camp would have tried to empower people like myself instead of coming after me, or framing us with their crazy, staging these crazy psyops. Unless the overarching agenda is something really radical, like they're trying to help Biden get elected, which seems fantastic, but if they split or crack the Republican vote, that's exactly what will happen. Or we'll have Kennedy as a president. We'll have somebody else. And I'm a delegate for the National Convention for the Republican Party, and I'm a committed delegate to President Trump. But there's a real possibility that Donald Trump will not be electable if he's convicted on some of these crimes or charges. I'm not saying that I think he should or he's guilty of these things. I'm saying that as a matter of lawfare and process, he could be eliminated as a potential candidate for the presidency. And there's different ways that can happen yet. I don't want that to happen, but these are the crazy politics and games that everyone's hedging on right now.
And we can go so much further down this. I've written about. I wrote a column about how the many different states that I've seen are, and including here in Michigan, we have disruptor candidates that are going to the national convention, or disruptor delegates that are going to the national convention in Milwaukee. There are 3 or 4 of the people that were on the committee of 17 that reviewed the overtly Marxist Constitution document that Kristina Karamo's team wanted to replace all of the county party bylaws with. And so we have 17 of the people that ostensibly approved that and helped to contribute to that, or 3 or 4 of those people of the 17 that are actually going to Milwaukee. And there are other states like in Idaho where the disruptor leader there, Dorothy Moon, who has rewritten the bylaws. They now are doing show trials, removing people for being so-called rhinos, for not stepping in line with what they determine the party platform to be. And she has created a committee that she controls that selects who all the delegates are that go to national convention. I think in red states, it's even more likely that there's going to be disruptors going to the national convention. So, in most states, I talked to Rob Steele, our RNC committeeman. He said that the RNC policy or rule is that once it makes it past the first round of voting, if it does make it past the first round of voting, if the nominee is not determined in the first round of voting, then the delegates are unbound to the results of their primary. And so, if something does happen, if there is some sort of, if Congress passes some sort of resolution saying that that Trump is guilty of insurrection, and there's some question about whether or not he's even going to be able to constitutionally appear on the ballot, then there could be all kinds of chaos. I mean, these people, that one of the things that the disruptors are known for in every state is they create orchestrated chaos at conventions. And so, who knows what could happen. And so, I'm glad you're going. I'm glad you're going to be a delegate. And, and we need people like you that, that understand what's going on representing us. And I think I'm also really glad. The great news is that Whatley is the RNC chair. I think he's a great parliamentarian and attorney, and he's not going to take crap. So so I think, Trump knew what he was doing when he endorsed him, and we will just see what happens. So I also would say that the things that you've said about Mike Flynn have been consistent with my own research. I do plan to do more writing about Flynn in the near future. But in every state that I've looked at, there are very clear connections between the disruptor leaders and Mike Flynn. And he's also, in the same way that I've looked at Michigan Precinct First, which was a Michigan organization that recruited and indoctrinated low information and angry delegates to become individuals to become delegates. The Reawaken Tour actually is structured very similarly in how they draw in people like me, that are kind of, beginning journalists and podcasters, and they draw them in and they help them to build a following. They get Flynn on their shows, and in the process, they systematically kind of indoctrinate them. And all of these podcasters, they tend to use the same kinds of language. It's the language that really unites all of this. That's how I was able to see this link in the first place, is that they use the same language, they use the same Bible verses in every state. And these podcasters, and some of them are some of the biggest in the country on the conservative side. They all use the same language, and they seem to have the same objective, which is to radicalize, like you said at the very beginning, to radicalize Republicans, the grassroots, and kind of steer the party further and further to the right, to make it so that it's not an electoral alternative to the crap that the Democrats are dishing up for us. So that's kind of my thesis, and definitely confirms everything that you've said. I'm so grateful that you came on the show, Dr. Huff. This has been just a joy for me. Crazy, fascinating, and I'm going to be. This is one that I'm definitely going to watch again. So check out Dr. Huff's book, The Truth About Wuhan: How I Uncovered the Biggest Lie in History. It is. It's pretty riveting. I mean, you tell your story about your military service, and really everything that has happened since then. And so I definitely recommend it. Please, if this is your first time you're seeing me and you'd like to know more, go to my Substack. It's biggertruth.substack.com. Please become a paying subscriber. It really helps me out. It's enabling me to do this full time, and I really am grateful for your support. So thank you all for being here, and until next time, there will be next time. Take care.